Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Welcome back for another episode. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have Gary Day Rodriguez with me. Gary and I met, I think, in February of this year at a C suite thought leader council summit. And we were just actually together for another summit this weekend. But I'd asked him if he would come on a pod and tell us a little bit about his story. And he graciously agreed to do so. So, Gary, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
It's my pleasure, Tom. I can think of a better person to spend a Monday morning with.
Gary, you have an incredibly interesting and unique story, and you do incredibly and interesting, unique work now. So, to the extent there is an outline for the podcast, I just gave it. So, we're gonna start with. Could you tell us about your professional background?
I would be more than happy to, but it ekes into my personal life as well and what I was really passionate about. So I began my whole career in the AIDS community, working, volunteering when that whole episode happened in our country. And in those days, there was no help at all. And for years, there was no help. So I began to become quite annoyed by the lack of help and compassion being shown to that particular segment of society. And I decided I would jump in and do some volunteer work, which I did. And the thing that actually produced my career was I began looking for accelerated change techniques to get people to resolution with their lives in 3 months because they only had 3 months to live. You were diagnosed, you were a skeleton in 3 months. So for me, it's psychotherapy is not going to do it because that's not fast. So I began to study accelerated change. Eventually, I landed on the topic of neuro-linguistic programming, which then morphed into another discipline called humanistic neuro-linguistic psychology. And it's really based upon the science of how we construct our own individual realities and how we can begin to start metamorphosizing those into something that actually drives us more towards our outcome and our life fulfillment. And so I've been in that discipline and of course, other disciplines as well. But that seems to be the heart of it, especially around the self-leadership trainings that I teach. So that's where I kind of got started, was out of this passion project of how do you help people change quickly?
Gary, were you living in the United States when you came upon this project or started to work in the AIDS arena?
Yeah, I was in San Diego, California. I pulled together the legislators from Sacramento, immunologists from all the major hospitals, holistic community as well, and we would do open forums. Eventually, that morphed into what they call the HEART program, Holistic AIDS Response Program. I was one of the 5 key members that started that program. And what that was volunteering to help that particular community. So I did that for 9 years until I got compassion fatigue. I was just like, I can't see anyone else die. And then I started teaching seminars, Tom, and public seminars. People were asking me, please teach seminars. So I began. Terrified my very first seminar. I had like 70 people show up, and I'm like, what the hell are all people doing here? I didn't know what I was doing yet, but it ended up being the very best seminar I probably ever taught. And then people from different organizations would come to my public events and go, we need this inside the 4 walls of our organizations. Would you come in and consult with us? And I'm like, sure. So I began going into organizations and doing what I do. It really breaks down into 4 sections. Self-leadership is a whole body of trainings that I do, very in-depth. Then I go into people intelligence, and that is very in-depth as well, because organizations run on relationships, and we don't know how to be in relationship successful. It's very difficult. The next set of trainings I do is innovation, 7 perspective thinking strategies, problem solving, and then alignment, fundamentally to get executive teams to be able to think as one unit and come to consensus around projects that they are either proposing or directions in which they want to move. Toxic cultures generally happen from the top down. When there's fractures at the top, there's fractures in middle management. People don't know where they're going, or they're not all in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. You're going to have a toxic culture eventually. So I started there and then rolled out trainings for the executive teams, rolled out trainings for mid and upper management. And I've had several companies go, we want this throughout the organization. And I've done that as well because incivility is a super high cost to culture, to the ability to have any type of security, like especially cybersecurity, especially. So those are all areas I became really interested in. And then lastly, it's influencing and presentation skills that I will teach managers and executives.
So you have engaged in this coaching literally across the world.
I
Uh,
have.
and but I'm really intrigued with your Australia connection. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting story. I was working in a clinic. I opened it up with a couple of my really good chiropractic friends. And there was a massage person who was probably the best massage person that I've ever had body work done by. And she came in to see me for this ancient old trauma that she carried that really stifled her capacity to even have joy in life. Her fiance was the love of her life, got killed in a freak kayaking accident. She was the one that drug him onto her kayak, paddled out to an island because they were in an ice cave in Alaska. And a chunk of ice fell from the cave and killed him. And so she felt like she had nothing to live for. And we did this trauma work with her, and her life like completely changed. And she got married. She married this Aussie guy, and she moved to Australia. And she kept calling me. He was one of my volunteers in my public trainings. And she kept calling me saying, you have to come to Australia. You have to come to Australia. So I eventually went, and geez, it was amazing. We would have 400 people show up at free lectures at the University of Western Australia. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a real listenership for me down here. So I just kept going back and going back. And eventually I met a person who I wanted to create a business with. And his name is Todd Hutchinson, a brilliant Mensa kind of mind. And him and I formed Peopleistic. And that became, we thought, let's write a book, which we did. We wrote a book called Humanistic Business, Profit for People with Passion and Purpose. And that book was the outline of how to install the strategies for conscious capitalism into organizations. And so we got published immediately by Bloomsbury Publishing House in London. They were like biting at the bit. How fast can you get the book done? This is like the wave we want to catch now. And so we wrote it on orbiting around 9 different competencies for cultures. And that's like ongoing training. I'll just list a few: ongoing training, trust, interdependency between departments, integrity, belonging, caring. So there's a variety of different cultural competencies that when they were actually present and they were activated within the organization, the profit margins of the companies went up exponentially. This is all based upon research that we had done around the effects of conscious capitalistic companies as in comparison to the good to great companies who are already making 3% more profit than regularly run organizations. And this is the power of culture and aligned leadership. And I think in our research, it was over a 3-year period of time, the profit margins went up for the humanistic companies by 75%. Good to great, really good, 73%. But because of the time and the maturing of a really beautiful culture that's based on the competencies, in 5-year period, those percentages went up. Humanistic companies went up to 128% profit over regularly run companies. Good to great were 77%. But this is the kicker. It blew my mind. But over a 10-year period of time, the humanistic companies went up 1,200% greater profit than regularly run organizations. Good to great, 301%. So the competitive capitalistic edge in organizations is not only technology, that's for sure, but to be able to advance the humanity within the organization is also one of the greatest capitalistic edges that I think organizations can get.
I have to stop you there because you just gave us the name of this episode, Competitive Capitalistic Edge. Gold Star Gary.
Tom, quick eye, quick mind.
So, Gary, how does a company start this process? Is there an assessment? Is there some way sort of to figure out where you are so you know what you have to do or where you want to go? How do you advocate really the start of the process or at least start of your process?
The very first point is I don't accept everyone that would approach me to work with it. I absolutely want to start with the executive team first. Because if there's a willingness for the executive team to go, look, we want to become the best expressions of us individually as we can. There's fractures on the team. There may be even silos on the executive team. But even if there's not, how do we increase our own internal self-leadership first? Because I believe you can't lead yourself. You cannot lead an organization or a team. You have to have very advanced, I think, mental emotional management skills personally to be able to flow through all the stress factors of your position. So when there is an executive team that is willing to look inside themselves and align and come to consensus in a way that honors all viewpoints at the top, then that is the prerequisite to be able to roll out anything. Otherwise, it doesn't stick. It's a waste of their time. It doesn't make me feel good if I don't get great results. And I don't get great results if I don't have alignment from the top.
The moving forward through the organization, do you have the executive leadership team, the senior leaders lead this effort, or do you come in and give additional training?
I come in and do additional training for sure. I mean, first I have to have the buy-in at the top and the experience that, hey, this stuff actually really works. I was working for a power company in Fort Worth, just outside of Fort Worth. And the CEO called me. We finished that. COVID finished the con. What happened was that he called me and said, Gary, I want you to know that we just had a team meeting with all of our department heads. And one person after another person said 3 years after we had done the training, they said that there's nothing that affected their life more than those trainings did. And that it stuck with them up to this moment in time. And I wanted you to know that. And I thought, thank you for letting me know. The bottom line is when you change someone from the very structure of their beliefs, their aligned value, the haunting memories of their past that oftentimes completely self-sabotage people. I mean, think about it this way, Tom. People walk into positions or into the organization, and the organization has absolutely zero clue on the history that they are carrying into the workplace. And if their history is filled with unresolved negative or traumatic events, they will project those unhealed aspects of themselves like a reptilian brain clicks on, and we go into fight, flight, or freeze. And so when you see people on your teams and they're super reactive, or they freeze up and they can't move, or they can't get motivated, it's not because they're bad workers. It's oftentimes because they don't have the psycho-emotional management skills to be able to manage what happened to them, first of all, and neutralize it and resolve it so they can use all their efforts to move forward. People stay stuck. And companies, if they're going to invest in the human equity, which I think is the most important thing to invest in, and really be able to help people, that is when a team becomes, I don't want to call it a family because that has different connotation, becomes aligned, committed, and loyal. Because when you help them change in the context of the business because you care enough, they become an infinite partner for you.
Let me see if I can. First of all, many of the listeners to this podcast are corporate compliance officers. Let me see if I can translate what I think I've heard you say into compliance speak. And I'm going to focus on culture as opposed to other types of risk.
Go.
So what I heard was culture. Assess your culture. From there, put together a culture strategy plan, whether that be an improvement strategy, a new strategy, or other. Train your employees on that strategy. Implement that strategy. Monitor the results of your implementation, and then update, improve, or change, remediate as appropriate. Would that be a fair assessment of what I've heard?
That would be a fair high-level assessment. The reason I speak in the way I do is because I really want people to understand that there is an emotional component that drives everything. Every behavior is driven by an emotion. To take emotion out of the conversation is foolish. You have to be able to understand that people are emotional creatures, and every single behavior they do is built upon a complex system, the biology of emotion that actually happens that will drive behavior or lack of behavior. And this is why the self-leadership piece is so important, because it trains people on literally the biology of their emotions. If you want to speak about self-awareness, which this is self-awareness on steroids, you go to Stanford University's advisory council on, they fundamentally unanimously did what is the one primary aspect of leadership that is an complete essential. Without it, nothing else works. And they unanimously voted self-awareness. So what I'm speaking about is self-awareness literally on steroids. How am I responsible for my own emotional state, for my own perspectives, which my emotional states will drive? The emotional states are created by core significant events, constellations of beliefs that get generated from those core significant events. And if those events are negatively charged, we will have a bunch of limiting beliefs around them, and they compound over time to build our worldview. And so when you look at an employee or a fellow teammate and you think, hold on, did they speak the way that they're speaking it? It's like they're from another planet. I'm seeing it this way and they're seeing it this way. And so the ability to consensus is wildly difficult at times. So when people understand that each one of us is responsible for our own perspectives, you train them in multiple 7 perspective thinking strategies so that they can begin to get some perspective on themselves. And you train them also in their own self-leadership, that if things are really out, you have to look inside and say, okay, how can I look at this differently so that I can see it from other people's perspectives, so I can get clarity on if I'm way off to the right or way off to the left, how do I come to the middle? And if people don't take that kind of self-ownership, it's very difficult. And when a whole company does it and that becomes a cultural norm, then decision-making, compliance, the ability to run a project from start to finish, interdepartmental relationships become way easier.
Gary, I've worked in multinational corporations with 50,000 plus employees. And although I knew who the CEO was, I never met him. I never even heard him speak. The corporation largely for me was my supervisor.
Yeah.
How can we get, or how do you advocate a company get middle management or the frontline supervisors to have these skills so they can work with their team to get it moving forward, at least culturally?
Okay, that's a great question. And I'm going to give you an answer that you're probably not thinking, but I'll say it anyways, and then I'll give alternatives to it. People always model the leader. So let's say we have senior management, and senior management is modeling what the executive team want and how they behave and how they engage. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when senior management is a testament of the values and mission of the organization, and they live it in word, thought, and action, upper management is going to model that. Upper management will absorb that, be a demonstration of those values, mission, and qualities of the culture. Then lower levels of management will also model that. It is fundamentally a very large modeling project that has to do with how each individual leader lives and aligns themselves to those cultural competencies, their values, and word, thought, and action. And when they do, you have more cohesion and you have a better chance of it being dispersed down, because people quit, not necessarily the company, they quit their managers.
I'm going to stop you there because I absolutely love that. And even the regulators in my space say it all starts at the top.
Yep.
Number one. So I think you're absolutely spot on.
That's why I want to start at the top. If I can start at the top and get alignment there, then middle management comes into alignment, lower level management comes into alignment, and then they infuse that into the teams. The worst thing to do is get onboarded into an organization and HR going, it's fabulous here. This is who we are. We're this, we're that. And it's just great. And you're going to love it here. And then they go out on the floor and they're experiencing people hating on each other, backbiting against each other. And they're thinking, oh my God, it's not safe here. It is a known fact that the incivility, if an employee sees a manager become like a lack of civility or uncivil to another employee, not even them, but if they see it, it traumatizes the observer as well. And listen to this. This is a great set of stats. The cost of incivility in work, this was done by the Marshall School of Business at USC. 48% of the employees intentionally decreased work effort. 38% intentionally decreased work quality. 66 said that their performance declined, and 78% said that their commitment to the organization declined. So when you look at that, just that last stat, 78% said that their commitment to the organization declined. How much money goes in to creating firewalls and different software to protect the intellectual property of an organization? You have one disgruntled employee. In fact, I think I read some stats recently that 98% of an IT department budget goes to technology. All it takes is one disgruntled individual that can let a bad actor in, and all of that 98% of that budget goes up in smoke. And there's very little going into increasing the cultural competencies and increasing the level of happiness, alignment, demonstration of core values, self-leadership that inspires others. Very little goes into teaching people how to be fully human in the workplace, have people intelligence, understand diversity, understand themselves, and bring the best qualities of themselves to play. I don't think culturally, I'm just going to go out, into meta land here, that churches are never going to do it. The government certainly never do it. But consciously run organizations, and this is part of humanistic organizations, sort of star in the sky that they reach for. But if we can begin to start changing people from the inside out, giving them the tools from the inside out, the whole workplace becomes more accountable, more human, more communicative, more respectful. That gets more profitability. That can be paid out then into social aspects or social needs out in the communities in which that organization serves. The best branding is you become wealthy enough in your organization, you can pay it forward into the communities that you're serving. That endears the organization to the community where you're doing business, and that actually begins to start uplifting the aspects of the employees, knowing that what they do in the interdependency of the organization actually is helping the communities in which they live. So if we want to inspire people to a more loyalty, more productivity, you have to give them a higher reason for being at the job.
I'd like to take that and overlay it with the following. We have 5 generations of employees in the workforce now. The things that may have motivated you and I don't motivate my daughter, who is either a millennial or Gen Z, and it may not motivate the generation after her. How do we take into account the multi-generations in the workforce and either as a leader, try to understand the influence of all, or as one of those generations, adapt to the corporate environment or competitive capitalism?
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say there's one thing that binds all of us, and that is kindness. I'm going to sound very 1960s on you here, but what binds us all is kindness, caring, and love. No generation likes to see anybody suffer. We're not that narcissistic yet. But the bottom line is, if we're doing good in the world, that is a maypole that everyone can orbit around. if we see suffering out on the streets of our communities, there is, in my experience, I've not met one person who goes, on shit. People care about other people at a very intrinsic level. We may have differences all over the board with the generational changes that are occurring. But one thing that I don't think does change is our humanity. And so this is about helping people become more contributive and more kind. In the power company that I work for, I had such respect for the CEO and the executive team. I could get tears in my eyes for how incredible they were and how kind and how generous in their communities they actually were. And I remember we actually, at Christmas time, we gave them all a present. We got paid and we handed out $50 gift cards to every single employee in the organization at Christmas, because it was an acknowledgement back saying, you guys were amazing going through the training. You guys were amazing on the changes that you're making. So, go to Walmart, go to Target, here's $50, go do something for yourself for Christmas, or buy more presents for your kids. They were so inspired because this company had a community of houses and apartments for battered women and their children. And they gave to that. Employees would go out and they would do volunteer work at this community. They did incredible things in their communities. And I wanted to reward them. I wanted to say, you guys are awesome. The connections that can be made, the sense of belonging was palatable in this company. I looked at it and I said, it's because of the heart of the CEO, the heart of him, and the rest of the executive team.
Gary, this seems like a good place to end this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask if our listeners wanted to connect with you or find out more about your consulting services, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
They can go to my website, and it's an international website. We have offices in Australia as well. So we're working on 2 continents, but it's www.peopleistic, PEOPLEISTIC.com, or they can email my office and one of my team members will pick that up. But it is my name, Gary at peopleistic.com, or support at peopleistic.com.
Are you on LinkedIn, Gary?
Oh, yeah. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I am there too.
Gary, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
I always enjoy seeing you, Tom. I was your chauffeur for that first trip to South Dakota. So I have fond memories of